How's everybody doing? Ooh, oh, that's actually pretty lively for after lunch. Okay. My name is Xavier Borja. I work for the City of Bend, and I have the pleasure of sitting on the advisory board with our guest speaker today, who I have the pleasure of introducing. And who we have is to, change leadership with Dave Salciccioli. Yes, Dave Salciccioli. Dave is a consultant and a coach who partners with individuals, teams, and organizations to help them achieve their desired future state. I'm excited to hand it over to Dave and hear what insights and activities he has brought us here today. With that, please welcome Dave.
Thank you. I got my own here. Check, we're good. All right, I'm gonna make you really uncomfortable and have you guys come as close to the front as you can. I know the whole topic's about change, so, it just seems apropos. So you don't have to do a first row, but second row, third row, fourth row. I don't want you that close. I'm just kidding. I just want to make sure you're by somebody because we'll be doing a lot of conversation. Perfect. If you weren't able to get the documents, there's a couple right up here. Zavi can help get out for you. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for letting me change your seating arrangement. Well, welcome. It's my pleasure to be with you today. I think this is year 3 or 4 that I've been invited back to speak, so something must be working, and I appreciate the topics that I've been able to speak on over the last couple of years. If you've sat through one of my topics before, you'll know that it's going to be less me and it's going to be more engagement, breakout sessions. We'll be doing some work using your phone as well, so lots of interaction today. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. A lot of my work involves helping to lead and guide strategy and change within organizations, and so I want to share some of those best practices with you today as we jump into it. So with that, I use this platform called Mentimeter, so if you have your phone, please scan the QR code, or you can go here. I'll be having you answer some questions throughout that. I'll get out of your way so you can scan it. Some speakers would say, no, make sure that everybody puts away their phone, but I'm gonna just allow you to utilize it for engagement today as we walk through. Once you get there, give me a thumbs up or a love on the bottom right there. I mean, you can give me a thumbs down if you want to, but that'll let me know that you were able to get in. Oh, I got one. Oh. Already.
That one stayed there. The last time it went away.
Yeah, there we go. Somebody switched it. You're being cheeky with me. So a couple things about this platform. Who's used Mentimeter before? Okay. I like to use it with lots of my workshops. There is a button down here as well that opens up a Q&A. So as we walk through today, again, there's going to be Q&A time at the end where I can queue those questions up. But anything that comes up for you, just go ahead and submit it, and then I'll pull those up at the end, as well as we can run a mic around at the end for other conversations. So isn't that cute? Look at that. Isn't that fun? That's all right. Still love you. Perfect. So to practice that, I know that we're after lunch. You might be feeling a little bit sleepy. Maybe that's not one of the words, but on your phone, you're going to see what's one word that describes how you're feeling right now, this moment. Go ahead and put it in. Thirsty. There's a drinking fountain out there. Energized, good, confident, Gucci. Can we use that as an adjective?
Gen Z are right there.
Yeah, I guess so. Fantastic, intrigued, full, eager. I'm hoping that's thirsty for learning. Again, you're welcome to take my water. Savi took my water. Oh, I'm just kidding.
No, I didn't take it.
Darn tootin'. Okay. Hot. All right. Perfect. So now you got a little introduction there. Wanted you to try that out, and we'll use it throughout our time today. So the agenda for our time, I've done welcome and introductions. We're going to do part 1 is what I call the change problem. We're going to look at how change affects us, both in our personal and our professional life, how it impacts us, the decisions we have to make around it. Part 2, the change solution. What can we do within our control to be able to maximize and find the opportunities when change comes upon us? Part 3, talk through a little bit of a change process. There's a tool that I've given you that I use a lot in my work with teams and organizations, and then we'll do some Q&A time at the end, and we'll be on our way. Objectives, you can see that I was a teacher beforehand. You can't really take that out of me. So a couple of objectives that we'll follow up on at the end here. I really want you to have a renewed mindset on the importance of change leadership and the ability for you, wherever you are within your organization, wherever you are as a professional, from entrepreneur to executive, that this is an essential skill for you to be able to adopt in the age that we're in. And then I also want to equip you with some best practices to initiate change and lead it effectively, whether it's a change in process or a cultural change or a change in your own life, to be able to do that successfully to get to the other side of that. All right, I want a little bit of a litmus test here. Your natural posture to change is what? When change happens to you or you feel that change is coming, how do you generally approach it? Do you resist it? Tolerate it, or you embrace it? Wow, we got a lot of embracers in here. Maybe it's the over-caffeinated at the second half of the day here. All right, I'm going to out you here real quick. How many of you were the embrace it? Okay. How many of you were the tolerate it? Who are our resistors here? Okay. So change impacts each of us uniquely and individually, depending upon your experience with how change was led in the past, your experience, your own personality, right? Some of us are more, we don't like surprises, we're a little bit more systematic, and that might be you if you were in the resisting category. How many were in the tolerate but probably should have put resisting? You're just feeling a little ambitious right now. Perfect. So change impacts all of us differently. And what I would posture to you today is that with the right tools, with the right mindset, all of us can get to a place, whether we resist or just tolerate change, to where we do embrace it and we say, there's opportunity here and I've got a path and an ability to help guide that, to make sure that that future state, wherever we're going, is more in my favor, more where I'd like to go personally and professionally. Thanks for your honesty there. So let's start with the change problem. I think it would be too simplistic to say that all of us have experienced change over the last couple of years, right? No, okay, no hands, great. I think we've all experienced that. I'm not going to overstate it, and talk about how COVID has impacted our lives, but it has impacted us and probably changed many things in your lives. Here's a couple of stories that I think are probably reminiscent for you. And these are experiences that I was leading clients through and organizations through as change was thrust upon them. So COVID happens, and one of the organizations I work with was really not prepared at all for a digital transformation into a more remote workforce. Anybody experience that? Okay. How do we go Zoom? How do we go digital? All of our culture's here. No, that's always how we've done it. We always have our meetings like this. Big change thrust upon that organization, right? Another organization I work with, in healthcare, totally shut down. We can't operate, right? Anybody experience that? Anybody in healthcare space? Okay. So had to figure out a way to adapt and respond to that change. Another organization, the market shifted and their product that they were ready to launch no longer had really any product market fit. Did anybody experience something like that? Or there wasn't a market for their product as much anymore. Economy's tight, people don't want to buy that thing. How many of you had a personal change? You were laid off. You thought about a new job transition. Anybody experience that? Okay. I knew that would be a big hitter here. So these are things that impacted us in the last couple of years, right? Change was thrust upon you. You didn't necessarily choose it, but and in these stories, and we had to learn how to respond. We could resist it, we could tolerate it, or we could figure out a way to embrace it, find the opportunity, and lead through that change to a better future state on the other end. So what I want you to understand is that as we look at the rate of change, just a little history lesson here, the rate of change for organizations and for us particularly is really, really fast. There's a great book by a local author here, Stephen Hacker, called Surfing Tsunamis, which really shows the rate of change is like a tsunami wave, right? So 16th century, way back, agricultural age, change was linear. It was 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. This guy over here innovated on the shovel and he traveled and they're like, oh, that's cool. I'll make that into a plow. And then it just sort of progressed, right? When we hit the industrial age and we start to do industrial processing for production of various things, it starts to speed up. Globalization is happening more. New ideas and new innovation starts to get spread, and incremental change. It's a little bit faster pace. As soon as you have the onset of the internet and more media sources, change becomes rapid, and here's where we're at in the conceptual age. Change is exponential, right? Somebody across the planet can make an innovation on a product or an innovation in a business, and instantly, the rest of the world has to either adapt to that change, adopt it, or become irrelevant. So the rate of change for us is like this, right? And it's become exponentially faster. You'll see that I talk a lot from this author, John Kotter, who's written a lot of books on leading change and change leadership. And I like this quote: "By any objective measure, the amount of significant, often traumatic change in organizations has grown tremendously over the past 2 decades." And I think, like I'm saying, even over the past 2 years, I feel like that rate has just skyrocketed. So I'd love to get some feedback from you, thinking about your own situation. What external forces, COVID can be one of those, have created change for you, or what internal forces? I wanted to move, I bought a house, we had a kid. What are some of those external things that have forced you to change in the past couple of years? And what are some internal things that have maybe forced you to change as well? You can submit this on your phone. Rent increase, new job. Moved. Yep. Married. Got a promotion, stagnation, buying a home, laid off. Hiring an internal business coach, nice work. Mental health, divorce, expanding my business, remote work, big change, high turnover. Lots of change. Yeah, lots of marriages. High volume of work, hiring crisis, mental health, workload increase. Cats. I like that one. Just cats, period. Homesteading, okay. Had a child, therapy, okay. Lots of changes, right? Now some of these are internal, like they were things that happened to you, but they create the urgency for change. These things change your situation. A lot of change in the past couple of years, right? So change comes at us in a couple of ways. One, we either wait and it happens upon us. Sometimes it's forced upon us, like COVID was. You know, nobody expected that. It just happened, right? And then sometimes there are the changes that we choose to initiate. We choose to initiate a new job, or having another child sometimes, or getting married, or buying a house, or whatever it might be, right? So change happens to us, and we can also initiate change for the things that we want for our future, personally and professionally. I really want to know who just wrote cats. I'm not going to out you on that one, but so good. So let me share a couple of thoughts around change, and a couple of things, some insights that I think will help us understand how change impacts us a little bit differently. So the first one here, and it goes a little bit against the normal phrase of change is hard. We've all heard that before. I would actually say that change is actually easy. The ability to envision change is an intellectual exercise. How many of you can think of a vision for what you want your future business to look like, how you want your team to function, what you want your life to look like? Can anybody go there? Okay. That's intellectual. And all of us, I think, have those visions. And I would say that part is the easy part. It's the second step beyond that around transition where that gets really hard. Because transition then instantly becomes an emotional exercise. Man, I want that new job, but the process of leaving mine and figuring out how to get there and making that happen. I want that house, but man, I hate moving. That transitionary process to get there is going to be difficult, right? So change, I believe, is something that we're all capable of, envisioning change, at least intellectually. Taking the step to initiate transition, coming out of that change is where it gets really messy, right? So what often happens is that the perceived pain of that transition, I have to pack up all my boxes and blah, 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 right, keeps us from initiating change altogether. I will say that oftentimes we overassume the pain of that transition. We overthink how painful it's going to be, whether it's a change in process or a change in how our team functions or a cultural change or a personal change. We often overassume and blow up how much that pain actually could be. But that perceived pain of transition keeps us from initiating anything altogether, right? This is why we can stay in jobs we don't like. This is why we can stay in situations that aren't healthy for us, because we're like, the pain of transitioning out of that or making a change, really, really difficult, not fun. What ends up happening, if we go down that process long enough, is that we get stuck in what's called the neutral zone, where I'm dissatisfied with my current state. I have a good vision of the future state, but I'm just sitting here in between, right? It feels a lot like a trip I recently had where I got stuck in the Denver airport for like 8 hours, right? You're in a terminal. You can't go home. You can't go forward. You're just stuck there, right? This is not a fun place for you to be personally. I know that you can probably say that. For your team to be in the midst of, we don't really know where we're going, but we're not really going to do anything to change it. For your business to be, I don't know where we're headed in the future, and we're not initiating any change to get there. So you get stuck in this neutral zone, which is a really painful place to be. Anybody feel this or have been there before? Okay. So what we want to do is we want to figure out tools and best practices to take us from not being able to envision the future, but then also how do we initiate that change in that transition so we don't get stuck in the terminal, just waiting for a long period of time for something to happen to force the change. So we have to initiate it, right? The other point that's not on the board here is that urgency is the engine for change. If there's no urgency, change cannot be initiated, right? Now, COVID forced a lot of urgency for people to make that change. Like, man, we should have gone digital and remote a long time ago, but now we got to do it like yesterday. So urgency becomes the driver for change. And we'll talk in a minute how you create an aligned sense of urgency. But how many of you have had a great idea? You're like, hey team, we should totally do this. Nobody else has any sense of urgency around it and it goes nowhere, right? So urgency is the number one thing we have to create and align around to be able to initiate changes that we want to see happen. Okay. Yes, perfect. Okay, breakout group number 1. Now, you can turn in a little partnership or a triad. That's why I wanted us all nice and close and cozy. A couple questions that I want you to answer here. First, and they're on your phone too. Introduce yourself, name, role, what organization you work for. And then, you don't have to do these sequentially, but I want you to try to address a couple of these. What challenges have you experienced in trying to lead change or seeing change led within the organization? What common errors or missteps have you seen that derail change and transition? And then how has your organization and leaders approached change in the past? Okay, we'll do about 5-ish minutes. Go. Awesome. So I'd love to hear if anybody's willing to share. I know if you had a big group, maybe you didn't all get to go. Sorry if I cut you short there. We'll have another conversation here in a little bit. I'd love to hear some thoughts. I got to sit in on a group. Thank you. What has derailed change and transition? How has it been approached in the past? Anything that was sort of the tenor of your group? I'd love to hear some of those themes.
I'm in the engineering industry, and with COVID and stuff going remote, training new employees has been one of the biggest challenges. And I think not having a plan to be able to train people remotely and also keep up with all the work that we have, because the industry is booming still, and we have deadlines to meet, and just trying to tie that in has been really tough, not having something organized that we can train our upcoming professionals. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that we've dealt with.
Yep. Hiring and turnover, does that derail change and progression? Anybody say that? Yeah. Thanks, Savi. Anybody else? A couple more.
Anybody else?
I went through a merger in the past year and a half, so there a lot of change with that. But like, one company versus another company and different cultures, and trying to inspire change and like bring the best of both together.
Yeah.
When people are stuck in their ways, oftentimes is really hard to, with just differing opinions on how to do things.
Yes. Huge time of change when you're merging or acquisition, whatever it might be. Yeah.
Mine was communication of like for why we want to change or why changes are getting kind of pushed down into the organization. Because sometimes the changes would be very, very helpful, but they were kind of difficult to implement. And so nobody wanted to implement them because they didn't know why. They were actually getting pushed down. So I feel like communication and just being open about like why we need to make an effort to change was kind of an important misstep.
Yeah. How many of you listed communication as something, a lack of thereof, as something that derails? Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Avi. So, yeah, and we'll address that one specifically, but certainly communication and talking about the larger why. We'll talk about some generational differences too. I'm using our age broadly here, but there are generational differences with, no, I'm not just gonna implement that change because I was asked to. I actually wanna know, how does it fit into the larger strategy, the larger picture? How does it impact, what I do? Does it make my day-to-day more effective or not? Those are all those questions that I think are going through our heads, right? So, but communication is a big one, and we talked about that too. Awesome. So let's transition now let's talk about the change solution. And what I want to bring up here is that for those of you who, we kind of answered it at the very beginning, how do you approach change? There is opportunity always when change is presented. And so for us, the skill is being able to identify the opportunity, embrace it, and figure out a way to integrate it and initiate it within our workflow. So coming back to those stories at the beginning, those clients who had similar struggles that you guys identified, as for probably many of your workforces, they were able to adapt to remote and flexible working environments, and that client found a lot of value there, right? They saw the change was thrust upon them, they embraced it as an opportunity, changed, and now their culture is redefined, but it's better than it was even previously. This healthcare group I was with that got shut down, they successfully navigated. They took a really proactive approach to communicate with all of their patients on a daily basis about all sorts of various things, and they just skyrocketed out of this COVID with new patients and new growth because they embraced and they found the opportunity within the change. This group that didn't have, their product didn't really have a market anymore. Once COVID hit, they pivoted, they figured out another way to retool their production processes, and they have a different business model now, but they're able to sustain their staff and be more successful. And then like for many of you, one of the individuals I was coaching who got laid off, found a better job, better fit, better aligned with their values and what they were hoping for the future, which I hope that some of you experienced that, and they're on a better path now. So I say all that to say that those who embrace change and find the opportunity in it are able to make their own luck. Those who embrace change, find the opportunity within it, make their own luck for the future. So let's talk about where that opportunity usually lies. This graph here just describes that external change, like we talked about, the ability for what we could do in an ideal, perfect world, is always rapidly moving at an exponential rate, like we talked about before. And the lower line here is what we can do internally as a team or as an organization to implement change. Now, for many organizations, that's pretty flat, unfortunately, right? And you can imagine if you play that graph out farther and farther, the gap between what's possible and what we're doing today gets wider and wider and wider, so much so that the business or team becomes irrelevant, or it goes bankrupt, or whatever it might be, right? So our task in terms of being able to understand how to lead change is how do we move and create greater agility and velocity in our ability to align people around changes we want to make and implement them and execute them quickly. Our agility there is the opportunity gap, because everybody else out in the market is trying to do the same thing, but if you can just tick that up just a little bit and align yourself around being able to make changes for improvement, then you are seizing that opportunity gap. If you do the opposite, like I said, that will continue to flatline, and the gap between what's possible and what you can do right now will just get wider and wider and wider. So our opportunity is in how well can we figure out how to lead and guide change and implement it effectively across a team or across an organization. No one submitted any questions. I must be really explaining things super good. I'm just kidding. We'll do question and answer at the end too. So I want to talk about 4 principles real quick here that'll get to what you were talking about in terms of the larger why. As we start to think about building the muscle for leading change from wherever you're at, if you're frontline employee to manager to individual contributor, if you're anywhere across that spectrum, we all have the ability to lead change, but we've got to get really focused around a couple of core principles. The first one here is change needs to move from only a select few creating the vision for change and trying to push change to a diverse many. So if you've got an idea for something you want to implement, you need to have a guiding coalition of people across your team, that across the levels, to be able to help guide that change. Because what you're doing there is you're creating a little army that has the same sense of urgency as you do to say, all right, let's do this thing. Let's do it together. If you try to lead it by yourself, or only a few people try to lead it, and it's not a diverse group, it's not going to go anywhere, right? How many have you seen that? The executives are trying to push change, or the managers, but nobody else has bought in. They haven't explained the why. They haven't formed a diverse group of people who want the same change, and it doesn't go anywhere. So we need to move from only a select few who have the vision for change or the desire for change to getting lots of people engaged in, all right, we could do this better. We can come up with a better onboarding training process for our new employees so that we can hire faster, get better talent, and get them to a productive place quicker, right? Let's do that. Let's get all the people aligned. We have to move our sense of change from a have to a want to, and that's that embracing piece. How many of you have individuals who do not want to change? This is the way we've always done it. This is why don't, how does the phrase go? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? There's some sentiment there. So we have to figure out ways to create a desire internally within the organization to say, no, we do want to change. We need to change. Change is good. Let's embrace it. Let's find the opportunity, like we're talking about today. If it stays as a have to, when people are forced to change, they don't really like it, right? If they have a desire to change and they see the value of it, people will embrace it more. One of the ways that we can do that is by, when we talk about changes that we want to see happen, it needs to be less about a heady thing, like here's how it would make this process work better. It has to be connected to emotion somehow. There needs to be a story around it, right? How can we engage the heart in not just, hey, this would make our life better, but man, if we did this, it would allow us to focus more on these customer service activities that would make our clients more happy and blah, 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 right? There needs to be some level of engagement on the heart side of it, the emotions, to be able to generate that larger sense of, yes, I want to do that. That sounds great. Let's make that happen. And really what we need to move from is not just managing changes when they come at us and waiting until we get forced to change, but adopting a proactive model like we're talking about today to be leaders of that change, to look into the future and say, at some point that we're going to have this crossroad, let's go ahead and start putting some process together now, right? Let's think about how we do that now. Let's start to align our team around how we could make that happen. Now, all of us in our day-to-day lives, a lot of times we live in the tyranny of the urgent, right? Like, I show up to work and I just respond to what comes at me and I hope I can ride the bull for 8 seconds. Like, that's the day, right? So this takes a little bit more of that proactive approach to say, no, where are we going? And I'm going to pull that future into right now, and I'm going to begin working on it and implementing it as best I can. Little definition for you on how I would define change leadership. And I know I'm probably losing you, so we'll do a breakout session in a minute here. But change leadership is the ability to influence and inspire action in others to initiate innovative and or necessary change with vision, alignment, and agility in times of growth, disruption, or uncertainty. I was a teacher and an English language arts one, but I'm sure that breaks some of the rules around how a sentence should be structured, but that's what you get at this point. So sometimes it's necessary change, sometimes it's innovative change, and oftentimes it occurs in times of uncertainty, disruption, or opportunities for growth. Hey, there's this thing out there, let's go get after it, and we can align our change around it. In regards to just a quick note on the difference between change management and change leadership, how many of you have come across the term change management before? Anybody have project managers within your organization who help to guide some of this? So yeah, you probably have a lot of that in the engineering space. So change management has a place, don't get me wrong. It has a place for certain types of projects that need to be kept within control, right? I think, Chad, you're a project manager, so you must know some of this. We want to make sure it stays within budget. We want to make sure that we're implementing things, smaller scale changes. It's very planned and deliberate. And that's great. And I think there's a specific skill set and a specific role that individuals usually play when they're doing change management work. What all of us can adopt is a level of change leadership, which is broader based, thinking more strategically, longer into the future. How do we transform really more of who we are as a whole? And how do we tuck change management processes or projects underneath a broader vision of who we want to become in the future? What's that larger transformation we're trying to get towards? Okay, so this will be back on your phone. On those 4 principles, I'd like you to do a little assessment on, these are 4 statements that discuss, are you or is your team or your organization ready to initiate changes or not? These are those 4 principles, and I want you to give a bit of an assessment. There's a want to from stakeholders to embrace change. We engage people's emotions to explain the greater meaning behind the change. We have a strong process for creating visions and actions for change, and we engage leaders at all levels to help lead change. Zavi, when's my end time again? How many of you are able to almost answer 5 on all those? Okay, good. Maybe your team, your organization is ready to do that. How many of you almost answered 1s on all those? Okay. Somewhere in the middle, everybody? Okay. So if you can't answer strongly on all of these, then you've got a bit of an uphill battle to get to a place where the culture is ready to embrace change and initiate change. Now, maybe you assessed it on the macro level, like the whole organization you're in, or the micro level for maybe just your team or kind of the functional unit you are within. But these things matter. If we can answer, 5s on these, then we've got lots of runway to be able to initiate change, because you've got people who want to do it. You figured out how to create visions for change and engage people's emotions. You engage people at all levels. But sometimes there's some work that needs to be done to prepare and pre-plan to initiate more transformation for the organization or team that you're in. Okay, so let's get back into some questions. I'd love for you to, you don't have to introduce yourself because you're all best friends now. Unless you changed your group, you're welcome to do so. This is more on the opportunity side. Where have you seen change led successfully in the past? What are some best practices you would suggest? I've suggested a few. I don't have all the answers. I'd love to hear what you guys have. And then this last question here is important because it comes back to that urgency. When you think about even your personal life or your professional life, where are you feeling change, the urgency for change right now? Because you want to attune yourself to where is the urgency, because urgency is where you need to lean in to guide change. Is it a process change? Your culture needs some changing. Your team meetings or rhythms need some changing. The way that your organization is, the strategy of it or something otherwise on a broader base needs to change. So where is there a sense of like, man, I feel like we should fix this, or there's an opportunity here? I'd love to hear some thoughts there. So I'll give you about 8 minutes this time. All right. So Zavi's going to run Mike again. I'd love to hear some feedback. I heard some great things from this group. A couple little things that I want to address that came up.
Who would like to share? There was a lot of conversation. Who wants?
A lot of
There
good
we go.
conversation.
Perfect.
Yeah, love to hear.
Hi, I'm Courtney.
Hi, Courtney.
I think I'm in a kind of unique scenario because it's just me and my boss. And he is an industrial engineer by trade, or by education, even though that's not what we do. We're in recruiting. So it's kind of nice because I'm like, I think we should try this. And he's like, great, let's put a plan out there and do some iterations and then come back and see how it goes and and then we'll see what we need to change and then we'll try it again.
Yeah, so he understands continuous improvement methodology to a T.
Yeah. So I was like, I want to try working remotely so I can go visit my family, but I don't need to like actually visit them the whole time. I can work while I'm there. I just want to be there. And he was like, great idea. So we started doing remote 1 day a week, each of us, and then reporting back like, where were the sticking points? What's going wrong? We've found some of those, and we're going to try and change that, and then we'll go back and do it again until it works.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what's great here is that oftentimes when we're trying to initiate change, sometimes we want to make it revolutionary. And there are times when that needs to happen, but oftentimes an evolutionary approach has a lot more buy-in. Like, hey, let's pilot this. Let's beta this with a little group. Let's see the value in it. Let's expand it later on. I mean, luckily, there's just two of you, so you're able to like just make it happen. But that's a great process, right? So everything around change leadership is around consistency over intensity. Because oftentimes, you go to a big retreat or a quarterly meeting and you're like, yeah, we're all going to do this. And then you go back off the mountaintop and nothing happens, right? This has happened for you. So it's more about developing the muscles to do things consistently over time, rather than these big spikes of, we're all excited about this and then we're going to make it happen. We're all excited. So a couple great thoughts. But yeah, evolutionary approach and then consistency over intensity in developing the systems to do that. So thank you. But that totally is continuous improvement methodology. Engineers love that. Like, how do we just iterate on it over time? Love to hear some more feedback. That's awesome. Yeah.
One of the best practices.
I feel so official now. One of the best practices for me with change would be because you talked about like getting the people's buy-in, and I feel like some leaders try to do that after the idea was initiated and convince them why it's a great idea. And I like it when we're trying to identify the problem as a group, not necessarily put it on the employees to figure it out, because that's not a good strategy either. But as a leadership, we bring everybody in and we try to just talk about it and see if we come up with solutions. And if you don't, that's fine too. So you don't have that pressure either. But it's themes in the back of the mind of everybody. And then later on, a week, 2 weeks from now, you can come up with a solution. And then I feel like you get more buy-in than trying to force on them.
Yep. That's such a good point. Engaging people early in the process. There's nothing worse than
this is great. We should just do this.
Yeah. Or like this team has already made up the decision, but then they go back and ask for feedback, but it's not integrated into the solution. It's like, well, why'd you ask me in the first place? You wasted my time. Like, that doesn't feel great, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, engaging in a really candid and open way early on in the process is really, really important.
Or having committees to come up with solutions, and they're like, yeah, that's a great idea, but we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, why are we wasting our time for committees?
Yeah. It's giving the the perception of
we're listening to
engagement, and we're listening, but not truly. Yeah, it's tough. Thank you. Anybody else? What'd you say?
What was that? No,
Volunteer somebody?
I said I wanted to volunteer someone else.
Oh, okay.
It's not fair.
One of the things I wanted to address here is the conversation came up about like what we call change fatigue. Change fatigue is a real thing, so you do have to be cautious a little bit when you're guiding these, like how much change is happening in parallel at the same time, because people can just get fatigued with change. And you're in the healthcare, so it's been a lot of change. It's like, okay, we need to just like chill out for a little bit, and let's still talk about the change, but like let's talk about a start date for this thing out there in the future, right? Doesn't mean that we can't still be like developing plans and whatever, but change fatigue is a real process that happens for teams. Awesome. Okay, we'll get to some specific Q&A in a minute here, but I wanted to talk, kind of my last part here is around this change process. And this is the same process that I use over and over and over and over again, whether it's macro level for a whole business or it's micro level for a very small process change. I'm using this process all the time. And so you can go start your own consulting firm and just get after it at this point. I'm just kidding. I mean, you can, but whatever you want to do. But it's not rocket science, but it's about consistency. It's about being focused on the task. Cotter, and I'll show you his resource here at the end. John Cotter has an 8-step process that talks a lot about what we're doing, so I would recommend that book. But essentially, what I like to do is I like to diagnose the current state first. And that's through lots of interviews, assessments, data. Let's really sit when we think about a process, or say we want to change our culture, right? I'm sure that's been a lot of what's happening. Interview everybody, talk to everybody, ask them all the same exact questions, look at data, and then sit in the reality of where we are right now. All the good, all the bad, all the ugly, and let's really reckon with where we are right now. Because if we're not aligned on our vision of where we're sitting at this current moment, it's really, really hard to design a future vision that's not mixed with all of those misperceptions. So we got to diagnose the current state. Then we jump to the very far other side of it. Who do we want to be? What does this process look like? What does our culture feel like in the future? Let's design that, and let's really get a clear picture that pulls us into the future rather than feeling like we have to be pushed when it's forced upon us, right? Perfect example. If we don't have a vision of our culture for the future, but a bunch of people are leaving, then we're going to be forced to figure out what's going on that's causing people to leave our organization, right? So let's actually get way ahead of it. Let's be proactive. Let's think about where we want to go. So then with those 2 fixed endpoints, you can design the gap strategy. What are the small, simple actions, milestones that we can take and keep talking about consistently as a team? It may take 2 years, whatever it might be, to help us move from current state to future state. Then we just deploy that gap strategy. We have regular meetings, we have regular times where we're consistently talking about it, we're coming back to it. This is where that business coach can help to hold the strategy because you're busy implementing work all the time, right? So somebody to govern the strategy, to carry it, to keep us focused on that task. And this can be done, again, from a micro standpoint to a macro standpoint, depending on whatever change you're trying to initiate or help to lead. Oh, good, I got a couple little heart and a thumbs up there. That tool that's in front of you mimics this process a little bit. I'm not going to make us go through it. I just want you to have it as a resource for afterwards. It's a simple framework to be able to take some of this and to do some pre-planning. So a couple things that I've said around the change leadership. One, oftentimes it's evolution, not revolution. It's consistency over intensity. And then my other third quip that I'll say for you is it's about moving slow to go fast. Take a lot of time in a planning process to generate a sense of urgency, to plan on a sheet like this. What's the problem we're really trying to solve? What's our objective? What does that future state look like? How are we going to measure success knowing when we got there? And then what are all those little steps that we want to use to implement that to the future? All of those things will help to go slow on that process so that when you start something, it goes a lot quicker because we've done all this pre-planning, all this pre-thinking to help us get there. So that's just a resource for you. You're welcome to take that. I can also send out with whatever the data dump looks like after this to help you with that. Okay. This is on your phone. Quick check on, did I meet the objectives? Did we get there on a couple of these? And then we're going to just do the last 15 or so minutes, 10 or so minutes. Some questions, some thoughts, some ideas. I have some FAQs that we can talk about as well for that last little bit of time. Oh, I did better than this morning. That's good. It's all about improvement, right? You guys are just nicer. I'm just kidding. Thank you. All right, so let's get down into the weeds. We can run the mic. I'd love to just hear some questions. You can submit one if you don't want to ask it, and I can pull it up on the screen. but love to hear some specific situations we can talk through maybe, or something that you'd like to share about your experience with change leadership. Let's go for it.
So implementing change leadership when you're running such a skeleton crew, right? Like how do you get people to take the break? How do you get folks to take a break from their workday to work on planning these things, right? I just feel like we're a skeleton crew right now, and we're all fatigued, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like everyone's kind of lowering their level of buy-in because of that.
Yeah. So you were in my talk last year too, a little bit about burnout. So one of the suggestions I would have here is that oftentimes getting out of the normal daily flow and actually getting to think higher level strategic can be a refreshing conversation for a team that's just executing the day-to-day work of operations, right? So I would suggest do it off-site, get out of your normal rhythm, do it at a coffee shop or somewhere else, and then just time block that. I'm big into time blocking. So just block it out as if it's an appointment you would have for anything else, and say, hey, we're just gonna have a strategy meeting here. We're gonna talk about where we're headed, where we're going. We'll make it fun, we'll do it off-site. We'll get our heads out of the normal day-to-day work and we'll make it happen. It doesn't always occur that way. Sometimes we're just busy. But the problem is if we don't do normal day-to-day operations alongside longer-term strategy and where we're headed, then we have to do those in parallel, or else we're going to end up in a place we don't want to be, right? The analogy I use for that is like if a cruise ship leaves from, where do cruise ships leave from? I don't know. Florida, sure. And wants to go to?
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, okay? Well, think of a destination a little bit farther out.
Colombia.
Argentina, okay? Let's go Florida to Argentina. I don't even know if that's a route. But if you're a couple of degrees off when you leave, you're gonna be hundreds of miles from the destination, right? So that's why we have to have this vision of the future, and we have to take time to develop that so that our day-to-day actions are actually in line with getting us closer to that. We're not gonna hit it perfectly, or else we may end up in a place 5 years from now where we're like, this isn't really where we wanted to be or what we wanted to do.
Triangle? What?
Yeah, Bermuda Triangle, good. Man, you guys you made that happen, so.
Other question?
Now that I'm used to the microphone.
Yeah, it's so official.
We had this conversation in our group too, and I've experienced it myself. How do you request change or encourage change when you're not necessarily in the top of the leadership that can make the decisions, and when you're bringing it up, you're kind of given the brush off?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that?
So we talked about, basically just know when it's the right time to ask. No, I'm just joking. If they're pacing, it's not the right time to go ask for that, right? So there is a way to lead from within, as long as there's some level of want to at the top. Now, if that's not there, that's a challenge, and you can get there. But it all comes down to getting that larger group to create a sense of urgency. So in one of the books, he talks about that, I wouldn't encourage this, but there was an accounting group that they knew that there needed to be some process change. There wasn't enough kind of levels of checks to make sure that things were done correctly. And so they actually fabricated a crisis, like they did something wrong that created this big crisis that woke up the upper leadership to be like, oh, I guess we better do something there, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't encourage that. I don't know how that's gonna work out for you, but we have to, if they don't see it as urgent, there's not going to be any change. So you have to create a really compelling vision for how this is going to be better for us. You have to get a lot of people who are, you're not going to try to stage a coup, but a lot of people who are like excited about that change, see the vision for it, and then you've got to figure out ways to create some conversation between those levels.
I do have some add up to that.
Okay.
What do you do when there's fear of repercussions in the team? Because you said you don't stage a coup, but to some people it can feel as such.
Then the culture's not ready for wholesale transformation. That's just the hard answer there.
No, that makes sense.
and so the graph is going to keep going like this, and this is going to stay stagnant, right? And the opportunity is not going to be seized in between what we can do versus what's possible.
It's just not the right fit, basically.
Yeah, which is a hard place. I'm not trying to coach you out of a job, but that's a hard thing. And so sometimes there needs to be larger turnover or change there. That culture is not ready to adopt some of those changes.
Thank you.
I don't know if that is a great answer for you, but so let's talk about the generational difference for a minute, because that's usually an FAQ, or a frequently asked question. Yeah. It can be hard sometimes, especially, and this isn't, I won't even say this is necessarily generational, but even people who have been in a place for a long time, and they've been part of creating the norms around a culture and processes, right? We can get really, really hold tightly to the things that we make and create, right? And so oftentimes when you get newer people in, and oftentimes that's a younger generation, there's a sense of, well, yeah, we want to change all these things, right? So you have to figure out a way to engage the folks, what I call the legacy stakeholders, people who have been there longer, by helping them see that it's not that that you did anything wrong, that what you created is bad, that what I can do is much better. It's what you've created is good, and we wouldn't be here without it. And how can we iterate on that so it's more sustainable for the next generation long term, right? They feel threatened by, you're going to come in and just wipe out everything that I've done, right? Which is a selfish answer, but we all do that, right? We feel pride in the things that we create and the things that we do. So you have to figure out a way to language it and like, no, I actually want you to be part of this process, as long as you don't obstruct it. But let's take what you've done and you can help us create the next version of it, right? And create something that's even greater than what's already here. That's a harder process, but if there's a want to, that can be done. It just takes longer, and you got to have some patience there. About 3 minutes. Good timekeeper. Questions, thoughts? Any specific situations? No more. I lulled you to sleep. A couple of resources. There are lots of books on this topic. Really, Bill Bridges and John Cotter have written the most on this. Obviously you saw that I swiped and adapted a lot of Cotter's work today towards this topic. One of the books that I've been really spending a lot of time in is called The Infinite Game. How many of you have read Simon Sinek before? This is his latest book. Really, really fantastic book. And I think it helps to create the framework for that. If you want to get a culture ready for change, try to get everybody to go through that book together, because it really puts to the forefront the necessity for us to be constantly reinventing ourselves around our set of core values. But great book, a couple of resources there. If you'd like to engage afterwards, I don't have business cards, but I'd be happy to engage with you on email if there's a specific situation that you're thinking about. But thanks for your time today, and appreciate it.